The unfinished jigsaw by the fire. The fire in the snug had been burning since 4 o'clock, and by the time the last customer of the evening pulled on his coat and said goodnight, the shepherd's crook had that particular quality of warmth that public houses achieve only in late November, when the windows are black and the outside world has been thoroughly discouraged from intruding. Arthur Grimshaw was doing his last wipe down when he noticed it. The square table in the snug, the one usually used for newspapers, dominoes, and people who wanted to sit near the hearth without being in the way, had been entirely taken over by a jigsaw. Not a finished one, not even close. The border was complete, and one corner showed what might be stonework, pale and slightly textured. The remaining pieces had been sorted into careful groups across the surface, darker ones together, lighter ones together, a small cluster that might be lettering. Beside it sat a flat, faded box, no picture on the lid. Arthur stood over it with his damp cloth and considered the situation. That was his table. Tables were for glasses, elbows, and the occasional plate of chips. They were not usually surrendered to anonymous puzzles of unknown origin. He thought about clearing it away. Then he looked again at the sorted piles, at the patience they represented, at the fact that every loose piece had been turned face up before the evening began. Somebody had done that deliberately. Somebody had been considerate about it. Arthur did what he generally did when village behaviour made no immediate sense to him. He left it alone. He shook out a clean tea towel from under the bar, laid it gently over the puzzle, turned off the lamp above the hearth, and drew the bolt across the door. The pub settled into its nighttime quiet. The tea towel lay pale in the last of the firelight. The box with no picture sat beside it. Wednesday evening arrived cold and damp, and Arthur removed the tea towel before opening without having made any conscious decision to do so. The jigsaw was exactly as he had left it. He noted this, replaced the tea towel with a look that suggested he was doing nothing of the sort, and went to unlock the front door. The early trade was the usual Wednesday mix. A couple of farmers from the lane, Gavin Price with mud still on his boots, and at just gone 7, the man Arthur privately thought of as the one who parks near the War Memorial, who came in twice a week, ordered a pint of bitter, and always, without fail, attempted to sit at whichever table was least available. He made directly for the square table in the snug. Arthur, from behind the bar, said, "Not that one," and pointed to the table beside it. He did not offer an explanation. The man moved without asking for one. This was the thing about a pub. If the landlord redirected you with sufficient certainty, the impulse to question him generally dissolved before it had fully formed. Nora Field arrived at 7:30. She was one of those people who came at the same time every Wednesday so reliably that Arthur had never in 15 years needed to be told she was coming. She hung her coat on the hook by the door, ordered her usual half, and settled herself near the fire. She looked at the tea towel. She looked at the box beside it. Then she moved the tea towel, folded it with the automatic neatness of a woman who had spent 30 years behind a post office counter, and set it on the adjacent chair. She picked up her glass, thought better of it, and set it back on the beer mat. Then she opened the box, tilted it toward the firelight, and began working through the pieces with the focused expression of someone who had completed a great many jigsaws and had no patience whatsoever for starting anywhere other than the edges. She already knew the border was done, so she found the stonework section and began. Arthur polished a glass. Nora placed 3 pieces. Arthur polished another glass. Nora placed 2 more. Neither of them said anything. The light snap of each piece finding its position was very small and very clear in the quiet of the snug. The fire popped once and settled. Nora finished her bitter, put on her coat and said, Good night, Arthur. Nothing in her voice suggested she had done anything other than sit by the fire for 40 minutes. Arthur said, Night, Nora. He refolded the tea towel over the puzzle before he locked up. The box with no picture sat beside it. Thursday brought Ben Carter in from the cold at around 8. His hood damp and his mood the colour of someone who had spent too long at his desk and had very little to show for it. He ordered a pint, took off his coat, and stood over the jigsaw with his hands on the back of the chair. Is there a system? He said. Nobody answered. The couple by the bar were talking about silage. Gavin Price had gone home. Ben sat down, turned several pieces over in his palm, one by one, and then slotted 2 of them into the window section, with the small grunt of a man who had accidentally enjoyed himself. He picked up his pint and moved to a different table. He did not look back. Mr. Collins came in on Friday. He took the square fireside table, opened his book, and over the course of the next hour placed 4 pieces with the unhurried precision of a retired mathematics master who did not make unnecessary movements. He turned one piece twice, considered it, and set it back down in exactly the same place. Later he moved it again and found the correct position without appearing to look. He finished his half of mild and left. Saturday was busy. 3 separate people attempted to use the fireside table, and 3 separate people were quietly redirected by Arthur before they had fully understood they had been redirected. This was, in its own way, an achievement. Arthur did not explain himself on any of the 3 occasions. He simply pointed, or placed a hand briefly on a shoulder, or in one case appeared to have moved between a man and the table without either of them being entirely clear on how it had happened. Cinders arrived in the early evening, as he sometimes did in winter, drawn presumably by the warmth rather than the company. He came in through the side door, found his usual chair occupied, and transferred his attention to the chair nearest the hearth. He sat. He regarded the jigsaw with the expression of a cat reviewing a problem of moderate interest. He placed one paw on the edge of the table and extended a single exploratory claw toward the sorted pieces. Arthur, without looking up from the glass he was drying, said, "Don't even think about it." Cinders withdrew his paw, arranged himself into a position of precise offended dignity, and sat with his back to the puzzle for the remainder of the evening. He did not add any pieces. By Sunday morning, when Arthur removed the tea towel before opening, the image had grown. Stone walls, warm lit windows, a hanging sign, still mostly incomplete. He stood looking at it for a moment, then refolded the tea towel carefully and went to unlock the door. The second week took on a rhythm. Arthur covered the jigsaw at closing, uncovered it before opening, and redirected anyone who arrived with a pint and a look of fireside intention. He had told no one he was doing this. He had not planned to do it. The routine had formed the way all his routines formed, quietly, without announcement, as if it had always been there. Nora came in on Wednesday and added several pieces to what was now clearly a sign of some kind. Pale background, dark lettering beginning to emerge at the top of the picture. She and Arthur managed, between them, a complete exchange on the subject. She said, "Funny old puzzle, that." He said, This was, given both their temperaments, essentially a conversation. Ben returned on Thursday, his coat still wet, and stood at the edge of the table for a moment before sitting. He turned a few pieces over without hurrying and said, "My gran used to do jigsaws. She did them face down. Said the shape mattered more than the picture." He fitted 2 pieces into the lower corner, picked up his pint, and moved away. Arthur noted the remark and did not respond to it. Late on Thursday, after closing, Arthur sat at the fireside table for a few minutes. This was not something he usually did. He sat in one of his own chairs and looked at the puzzle and considered it, the way he occasionally considered the accounts or a leaking tap, Not anxiously, but squarely. It occurred to him that the jigsaw might be a comment. Not a cruel one, but a considered one. Stone walls and warm windows and a familiar roofline assembling itself across 300 pieces. Someone might be saying something about the pub, about what it had been, about what it ought to remain. He was not certain how he felt about being made the subject of someone else's quiet opinion. He looked at the sorted piles, though, at the fact that every piece was still face up, that the borderwork had not been disturbed in 2 weeks, that the tea towel had been refolded neatly on the adjacent chair by someone other than himself on at least 2 occasions. The thought dissolved, more or less. He covered the jigsaw, went to the open door and looked up the lane. The village was very still, and the air smelled of cold stone and the last of someone's wood smoke. He bolted the door. The 3rd week, and Nora arrived on Wednesday with purpose. She settled at the fireside table with the box, and she worked with the focused quiet of a woman who intended to finish a thing. The pub moved around her at its usual pace, the low murmur of conversation from the bar, the occasional scrape of a chair, the fire popping once and settling. Nora sorted, compared, placed. The sign at the top of the image came together piece by piece. A pale ground textured like old paper, dark lettering, a serif, the kind used in a different age of printing. At the centre of it, an illustration, a shepherd's crook, simply drawn, rendered in faded ink. She placed the last piece of the sign, the shepherd's crook. The whole picture resolved at once, the way jigsaw pictures do when the final piece of the main element settles and everything that had been almost familiar becomes entirely certain. The pub from outside, on a winter evening. Stone walls, windows warm with interior light. The cobbled square just visible at the lower edge of the frame. Not a photograph, an illustrator's impression, the kind that might have appeared in a village calendar 25 or 30 years ago. Back when someone had thought it worth recording what the village looked like, before it became the kind of thing that needed recording. Arthur had not moved from behind the bar. He watched Nora press the last piece home with her thumb. He watched her sit back slightly. Then he picked up his cloth and polished a section of the bar that had been clean since at least Tuesday. From the cobbled square outside, the church clock began its slow count to 9. Each note came clearly through the old glass, unhurried, certain of itself. Nora finished her bitter. She gathered her coat from the adjacent chair and put it on, button by button. "Good night, Arthur," she said. "Night, Nora," he said. The fire ticked. The clock finished its count. The completed jigsaw sat on the square table in the snug, and the pub held it the way it held everything, without comment, without ceremony, without making a particular fuss. The box with no picture sat beside it. Arthur was behind the bar the following morning when he saw it. Beside the box with no picture on the lid, where the faded cardboard had sat for 3 weeks, there was now a small bottle of puzzle glue, ordinary looking. The sort of thing you could order easily enough, if you were the sort of person who anticipated the end of a jigsaw before it arrived. Arthur looked at it for a long moment. Then he looked toward the door, as if the village might have the decency to come in and explain itself. Naturally, it did not. He applied the glue carefully and slowly, working from the edges inward the way the instructions suggested, and when it had set, he slid a piece of stiff backing board underneath the completed puzzle, with the patience of a man who understood that some tasks could not be hurried. He set it in a shallow frame, the sort used for old menus and printed notices, and hung it on the narrow wall beside the fireplace, between an old photograph of the village fete and the old horse brass. It looked, once it was up, as if it had always been there. No one ever admitted to bringing the jigsaw in. Arthur never asked. There were a few suspects, if you were inclined to look for them, but the thing about a 3-week puzzle was that by the time it was finished, it no longer quite belonged to whoever had started it. Some questions, he had learned, were better left beside the fire. where people could warm their hands over them without needing to explain themselves. He drew back the bolt. He pushed the door open into the cold morning air. The village was already going about its business, as it always had, quietly, steadily, and with somewhere warm to come back to.